You start your book with the coronavirus pandemic and around this central theme of breathing and breath, right? So in 2020, there was COVID. I don't know, the audience, I don't know if they've ever heard of it, but there was this thing called the coronavirus pandemic. And also the murder of George Floyd, obviously, where he lost his breath and lost his life and couldn't breathe. Climate change, all coming together. So just take us through that and why you chose to open with that and how it informs the rest of your book.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that essay begins with this, exactly as you just beautifully put it, the fact of breath in 2020. And the seed of that essay was planted because I learned that the word conspiracy, if you go back etymologically to its origin, actually means to breathe together. And so, of course, I was also thinking, like so many others, about how there are lots of conspiracies these days, right? There's lots of misapprehensions about how power works and who's pulling the strings. But it turns out that actually, this idea of breathing together has another dimension. If you go back to the founding of this country, there is something, and it's still in effect, there's something called the conspiracy doctrine, which is a legal framework that is used to suppress organizing, to suppress specifically labor unions. So throughout the 1800s and 1900s, workers who were trying to come together to advocate, for better treatment at their workplace, but basically just to change society, were charged with being a conspiracy. There's a great line I quote in that essay that's something like, when workers meet to try to raise wages, it's a conspiracy. But when bosses do it, when bosses meet to lower wages, it's a conference, right? So this, conspiracy doctrine was used to suppress organizing. And so what I'm looking at in that essay is the way that the long war against the left, against working people, has contributed to all of these injustices, right? To systemic racism and police violence, to the fact we're just struggling to make ends meet. People are drowning in debt, which is something I'm very concerned about. The fact of climate change, runaway climate change, it's because actually, people have been punished for trying to organize to change things. And that long war on the left has created this vacuum into which these destructive conspiracy theories then flourish, right? So it's all connected. So that essay is me, thinking about the conditions of 2020. They're obviously spilling over into 2021. And making what is sort of the fundamental point of the entire collection, which is that people need to organize, that actually, if we want to change things for the better, what's required is a conspiracy of epic proportions. People have to come and breathe together, get organized, build power, so we can actually affect change. And that is what I've been trying to do, in my work with the Dead Collective, and in collaboration with other movements for most of my life.
Well, you write that our inability to conspire is actually hurting us, which I thought was such a great flip on the concept of the conspiracy theory. And you take us through historically the first labor conspiracy case, which I know you just alluded to, from the 1805 Philadelphia cordwainers trial. Could you talk about that to the audience and how that sets the stage for labor conspiracies in the broader sense?
Yeah, again, the conspiracy doctrine goes back to the colonial era. It was actually something that was imported from British common law, and it was twisted around. So conspiracy doctrine initially in Britain was about preventing people from sort of abusing the legal system. So, and bringing frivolous cases. Somehow it got turned around into punishing those who are trying to build a collective, build collectivity, build power, and go on strike and organize for better wages and stuff like that. So it's one of these things where, a legal, the law is distorted by people in power. So that was an important first case because, essentially the takeaway from it was that labor unions were illegal. And that was the reality for, decades and decades. And of course, workers won the right to organize we look at the New Deal era and the Wagner Act as a kind of breakthrough where workers finally had the right to form unions. And then, of course, there was the counterattack with the passage of Taft-Hartley in 1947, which said, okay, sure, you have a basic right to unionize, but you can't do solidarity strikes, you can't do sit-down strikes. And so then, once again, makes many forms of solidarity and conspiring illegal. So it's just, I think it's really important for those of us who are struggling to organize to put these, to put this all in historical context and realize just how threatening it is, just how threatening organizing is to the status quo, right? They wouldn't have to make it illegal to engage in this legal suppression of solidarity if there wasn't something incredibly powerful about it. And so, yeah, this word, I think conspire is something we do need to reclaim, and I was also consciously pushing back against the fact that, the takeaway from so many liberals in this moment of these destructive conspiracy theories is, okay, what we need to do is trust experts, trust science, let the responsible people handle it. And I'm saying, no, what we need to do is actually build democratic mass political power, right? So that we can finally engage in the kind of economic struggle and redistribution that we really need if we're going to solve some of these major political and social dilemmas.
Yeah, and you also give some more historical context about, I guess, the modern interpretation of of conspiracy theories. COINTELPRO, Watergate, the lies that got us into the Iraq War, and it just creates this fertile ground for conspiracy theories as we know them today. I want to get into Q, which you write about extensively, but just in terms of from, I guess, the 20th century on, even or I guess modern right wingers who seem to delve more into conspiracy theories than the left in general, even if they're not consciously thinking about, say, COINTELPRO or whatever, how did all of those historical events create this ecosystem where this kind of conspiracy theory could thrive?
Yeah, thank you I'm like, what did I write in that essay? Yeah, thanks for the reminder. I think that's really important. One of the main pieces of that essay is that the most destructive conspiracy theories have emanated from the center of power, right? And they have been anti-communist, white supremacist, anti-Muslim conspiracies, right? And so, looking at the two waves of the Red Scare in the 20th century, anti-communism, McCarthyism, right? These conspiracy theories have been, again, emanating from the very center of power and have been about suppressing the left. And that has created this vacuum. The other element that has aided these sort of negative, totally, reactionary and baseless conspiracy theories is, of course, our media ecosystem, where, basically you can kind of monetize confusion, monetize, conspiracism, and be a kind of conspiracy entrepreneur. And so that's the other, I think that's another important aspect that's in the piece. But I think it's really important, to acknowledge the fact that there are grounds for being very suspicious of the government, and that's created this context, right? The context of mistrust, and also, again, the suppression of the left. Because I think part of why an organized, robust left is so important, and an organized working class and strong unions, is what they do is they provide a framework for people to understand the conditions they're living in, to have a theory of power, a theory of change, and to then have a constructive way of addressing these injustices and inequities. Right? When you take away that, and you have exploding inequality as we do, when you have insecurity, instability, there's tons of social science research that shows that those are the conditions on which these, again, destructive conspiracy theories feed, and the conditions in which they flourish. So that's where we are.
Yeah, I mean, and it's so much more tantalizing to view your issues as the result of a secret cabal of baby eaters as opposed to just what's in front of us, which is political corruption and capitalism, right? And
exactly.
So I think political corruption is a problem, but as I've become, I think, more seasoned and learned more, you really just kind of find out it's mostly just capitalism. So can you talk about how capitalism in and of itself plays into the proliferation of conspiracy theories, and in what way does it make it so uniquely American, the way that we've created this conspiracy situation?
Yeah, I mean, there's, one thing I acknowledge that piece too. In a way, this country was born of conspiracy theories, right? I mean, it was in the Declaration of Independence. We charged England with, essentially conspiring against us, and so there's a kind of paranoid. I mean, other people have written about this. There's a kind of paranoid style to American politics, right? This is not a new observation. And so that's something, I think that is something that is deep within us. I think the challenge, though, of course, is that, we can't just fact check ourselves out of this problem. So that's, again, the problem with the kind of liberal take on this. We do have to acknowledge, as you say, that there is, deep corruption, and that capitalism.
We can't fact check ourselves out of this problem is a great.
Exactly. We have to organize ourselves out of this problem. And so capitalism, I think will support, it will support total, it will support any ideology that's profitable, right? And so this is, again, this whole problem of the internet and, kind of conspiracy entrepreneurs. I mean, capitalism is not a rational system. And it definitely is entwined with the presence and pervasiveness of these new ideologies that, again, are not that new. They're part and parcel of this long historic trend. So absolutely, we need to put the problem of corruption, the problem of capitalism front and center. And yeah, fact checking is insufficient.
Well, I mean that everyone at CNN's heart is breaking when you hear that, or just posts. It's like,
right.
How could we make this very simple concept very convoluted?
Right.
I'll move off the conspiracy part of your book in a bit, but I'm just so fascinated by the nature of right-wing conspiracies, because everything we're saying, the critiques and everything you're saying, it's a left-wing critique, right? But and so you don't necessarily think that this would be in the forefront of a QAnon person's mind, because there are elements of sexism. Women need to be in the home, this like paranoia about children and what's happening with the children, and we need to save the children. There is patriarchy embedded in there, but are you saying that fundamentally the environment that allows for these diversions to even happen in modern day, QAnon conspiracy plandemic times is universal, at least in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think conspiracism is probably a habit of the human mind, right? And so I don't think we'll ever totally eliminate it, but what we can do is reduce the conditions under which it flourishes. So again, we know that these kinds of conspiracy theorists really thrive in periods of instability, insecurity, inequality. And those are the conditions that we're living in. And there's also, they also flourish because there's a lack of competition. In other words, because the majority of people in the United States, again, they don't have the opportunity to join a union, right? We aren't part of civic associations. So, people are very isolated and atomized. We also know that loneliness contributes to a proclivity to engage in these kinds of conspiracizing. So those are the conditions that we need to mitigate. And you need, again, an organized progressive movement to do that, because you don't reduce inequality if there's no left, if there are no trade unions, right? So this is, again, one of these things where, it all flows back to that. It flows back to that original conspiracy doctrine and the war on the left, right? And so this is why I say that the war on the left has been a literal fool's errand, right? Because it's created this idiocy and how many people could be spared believing bullshit? Well, I don't know, right? So what I say is, the problem is that people are more likely to find